I'm kind of comparing out of a couple translations in the video based on one translation is extremely legalistically translated. And I'm not saying it's in error, it's just being a little bit more clear based on the usage of the word that would make sense in our English, verbatim in today's world run by the lawyers. When Paul was writing, we know Paul's writings, according to Peter, were very hard or difficult to understand. Peter warned about that, mainly because Peter knew about Paul's background, not only as a Pharisee, but he was a Roman educated civil person with a civil condition name, Saul of Tarsus in the past. And he was basically now, at the point when he was writing these scriptures, was writing to a world as the 13th apostle, put there by Christ to educate a very vast audience that were not of the original nation of Israel. And therefore, him being of the original covenant nation of Israel, this was an extremely difficult path for him to follow, because he'd be hated by a number of parties. One, he'd be hated by the Romans because he was of the Roman nobility. Most people don't realize that, because Paul was basically of nobility when he said, I am freeborn, when he mentioned that word. Freeborn in its etymology means basically nobility. So he was of a very high class of the Roman hierarchy, and therefore would not be well received when he starts to go down something that is outside that hierarchy. Then we have him as a Pharisee, raised as a Pharisee. Now it's even getting worse, because now he's part of the Talmudic traditional civil history, pagan history, of when the Jews or the Israelites were under captivity under the Babylonians, and then basically perverted the Torah, and then became part of their civil captors, and started to infiltrate and mingle what was of God mixed in with Babylonian black magic, with their black magic practicing priests. So now the danger comes in, he's aware of those teachings, and then on top of it, he's now been converted by the grace of God to be a slave of Jesus Christ. So he has a knowledge of all the background you could possibly think of. The heresy of the original nation of Israel, when God's Spirit was taken away from them in Babylon in 586, when they were destroyed, were taken away. Jerusalem was devastated, laid waste to, and then probably at least 1.5 million captives were taken back to Babylon. And then on top of that, he becomes mixed in with the Roman Empire through some ancestry that must be in his background, which led him into being of the nobility. And then he was definitely in a realm that was far different. He was now even above the Pharisees. He was in a very high position with citizenship, which also provided what we call, in the best essence in today, there's a lot of theory about a lodal title, but a lodal title, Paul had that because the fact was nobility of a true Roman citizen, if you want to use that term in fiction, but a citizen of Rome who was designated as freeborn would have been having title to property with no tax and no one to take over their properties. So he was at a higher level. Certainly today, someone could say, I'm an American, I'm a Canadian, but that means nothing. That's all nonsense anyways, because in reality, you don't have that noble title. It's nothing more than now just someone who's assuming a title that is now indebted to a banking system. So there is no allodial title, because that would be tax-free. Nobility, no one taxes the nobles because they're nobility to tax. That's where noble comes from. So Paul's in a very interesting situation. So when we're reading scriptures and we're comparing what we're going through here, it kind of gives us a great understanding between two translations, because both the King James Version and one that's promoted by a legalistic group that uses the New World Translation, they have a massive team of lawyers and control to actually indicate the power under when they cross the line into what is being warned about the legal or the perversion of the system that surrounds us right now under Satan. So they put it out there, but you may not see it if you're not looking. So we go to fictitious, which means to conform to fashion. That's what fictitious is. Fiction is to conform. Okay, it's to feign. It has many meanings. We'll do that in the next video to give you a complete clarification. But when we go to Paul's words at Romans chapter 12, verse 2, in the King James Version it says, "And be not conformed to this world." When we talk about world, we're talking about temporal, we're talking about commerce, we're talking about the fictitious, sinful world that man entered into that had nothing to do with God's plan with Adam originally. Man was perfect. He had no concern. He had the eternity of God's Spirit breathed into him as the breath of life, and then he became corrupt upon sin, listening to a treasonous liar, which is Satan, the father of the lie. So he's actually, in simplicity, the father of legal fiction. So we're going to say that clear right now. He is the father of legal fiction. When you understand what fiction is, you will understand that that is what legalists or lawyers promote. That's why they're called devil's advocates. They advocate the will of the devil for you having free will to choose to sin, to go down the broad road leading to destruction as he is on, not the narrow path leading to life through truth. So in the Romans 12 verse 2 it says, "And be not conformed." Now we got form going on, being conformed for form. Everything that is in the legal is part of form, not substance. Truth is substance, legal is form. So as be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now I'm going to read you out of the, we'll call it the New World Order translation, which would be much more straightforward. 12 and 2 says, "And quit being fashioned after this system of things, but be transformed by making your mind over, that you may prove to yourselves the good and acceptable and perfect will of God." So it says, quit being fashioned. Well, fiction also has a word, not only to feign, but to form, but it also means to fashion. It also leads to the word to finger, because you need an informant in a system that is basically doing what it did to Jesus when it actually accused him of something that he was not part of, because he clearly stated in his good confession before Pontius Pilate that his kingdom was not of this world. It was spiritual. It was not temporal as that of Adamic sin that all the ruling nations were under. So they were all in defect from God, and he certainly couldn't be of God and be part of a defect or have corruption or sin, because he was without sin upon his execution. So there's so many little pieces of truth in the understanding when reading the scriptures, but most will not read them because they're reading with secularized eyes. They're not reading with spiritual, and therefore they can't see the wickedness and the sinfulness and the secular humanity system that's based on not mankind, but sinful, defective humankind that is operated by the wicked one, Satan. So we're going to go into another scripture in the next video, which shall also understand what we're talking about. But it is not out of the ordinary that we would be fashioned, conformed to using a legal surname that would appear itself to be over and above the will of God. What was presented as a relief, which would be in your God-given factual Christian name, because that's the source of where you came from, your originating source of life.